Are we on? Because I don't see.
Yep, you're on.
Okay, it's a new format for StreamYard. So, well, hello everybody. I'm Howie Hawkins. I was the Green Party candidate and the Socialist Party candidate for president in 2020. And this podcast, Green Socialist Notes, is about continuing to educate and organize around the eco-socialist program that me and my running mate Angela Walker ran on in 2020. And as we've been talking about for months now, Gaza is at the top of the list. The violence and killing going on there has got to stop. We need a ceasefire. We need to cut off arms to Israel. They're about to invade Rafah. They're going ahead with that, even though apparently the administration has told them not to. And the big development since we last talked about this is the encampments on college campuses, which for me is reminiscent of the anti-apartheid shanty towns. I was involved, even though I was 10 years past graduation, in building the shanty town. We built it out of old barn boards, and the administration kind of got wind of what we were going to do, but we prefabbed it, the frame, and drove it in on a flatbed truck and put it down on the center of Dartmouth College campus, which is a green. And I remember, the official, I forget what he was, the assistant dean or the dean or something, came running out saying, "Oh, you can't do that." And he got halfway out and he realized we'd done it already. And so we got that up in a few minutes. There's somewhere on NBC's, archive, a picture of me on top of it in the rafters, putting the roof on and swinging around like a monkey. But we really sort of grabbed the center of campus attention. And then the right wing around this publication called the Dartmouth Review, which was funded by national conservatives associated with the National Review, they came out and tried to knock it down with sledgehammers, which really backfired on them. And so we really put the administration, we had them right where we wanted. We eventually got divestment. But that right-wing attack on us made, it went from there, it went across the country. It's what we call viral today. So students started putting up shanty towns, including at Columbia University, where the shanty town that, sparked this wave of encampments, the administration, I mean, they're so dumb. They acted like those right-wingers did at Dartmouth. They went in and arrested all these people in a nonviolent protest. And of course, everybody's outraged. The faculty, many people in New York City, and people on other campuses who then emulated what Columbia did. And I don't know what the count is, but I think it's about 50 campuses now have these encampments. And the administrations are acting stupid in a lot of cases by arresting the people for doing that. It's a nonviolent protest. I mean, if I was the administration, I would not want to make it worse by arresting them. I'd let them sit out there, and, they're going on vacation pretty soon for summer vacation in Columbia. It's 2 weeks. So I just, the people that run our institutions in our country are not the sharpest knives in the drawer, but here we are. And I think it's important that we support these students. There are on the fringes anti-Semitic statements. Like at Columbia, some guy, we don't know who he was walking around with a Palestinian flag outside the gates of Columbia. He couldn't get in because of their security, and saying, to Jews should go back to Poland, I guess is what he was saying. For all we know, that is somebody that, the pro-Israeli forces set up to make the demonstrations look bad. But of course, the demonstrators have denounced that. They just had the Jewish Seder where Muslims and Jews and Christians jointly participated in the ceremonies. So, this is not anti-Semitic, it's anti-apartheid, occupation, and genocide that's going on in Gaza and the West Bank. And let's not forget the West Bank. While this, fighting in Gaza has gone on, the settlers, with the backing of the Israeli Defense Force, have been taking Palestinian land and homes and forcing them out more and killing people. It's over 400 last I looked. So this is something that we've got to, stay on top of and keep protesting. Biden came into the city of Syracuse on Thursday, and we had a protest there, calling for a ceasefire and cutting off arms to Israel. And Biden could hear it. I don't think he didn't look at it, but he could hear it. And we just got to keep that up. So another thing that happened since we last talked about what's going on in Gaza, also what's going on in Ukraine, is the foreign aid bill passed. And what the House Speaker did is what I've talked about on this podcast for weeks and months, is that they ought to separate Israeli aid from Ukrainian aid, from aid to the Indo-Pacific and so forth, so that members of the House could vote for what they wanted or what they opposed. So, progressives were for the aid to Ukraine, but against the aid to Israel. And ironically, it was the Republican who had voted against Ukraine aid and, pretty much on the far right of the Republican Party. Now the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, did what, many progressives and people in the Ukraine Solidarity Movement wanted. So the progressives focused their efforts in this drama in resisting the aid to Israel, and 37 of them in the House voted against it. They were all Democrats, and 37 out of 435 is less than 10%, which just shows what a long way we have to go to break the support in Congress for whatever Israel does, right or wrong. So that, was sobering, yet it was a break from the past when most Israeli aid, got near unanimous support. And then on the Ukraine aid bill, all the Democrats voted for it, while the Republicans were split, 101 for it and a slight majority of 112 against it. So that makes the Republican antis in terms of Ukraine a 25% minority in the House. And we all heard about Marjorie Taylor Greene, threatening to remove the Speaker, Mike Johnson, if he moved forward with Ukraine aid. And I mean, she's so isolated now that even the New York Post, if you know that, it's a tabloid in New York City that has, eye-catching or what's the word? Covers, and one of their covers this week was Moscow Marjorie with her, her blonde hair, but one of those Russian wool or fur hats on her head. So they're even making fun of her. So this aid will last through 2024. That's what it was intended for. It was proposed by Biden as one big package instead of a lot of supplementals like we had in 22 and 23, because the numbers were eroding in Congress, at least among the Republicans. But I think these votes show that in the House, as well as the Senate, and even more in the Senate, the votes are there for more aid in 2025. And the elections won't change that. But that doesn't mean the Republicans are not going to use the Ukraine aid as a hostage to get some of their other demands around draconian border controls and deficit reduction. So it doesn't mean it's going to be easy to get more aid to Ukraine. And of course, the wild card is if Trump gets elected. He will do what he thinks is in his own personal interest. He's also known for following the advice of the last person he talks to. But the people he's likely to be talking to, if he's elected, are the right-wingers that the Pro-Putin Heritage Foundation, the think tank, has been preparing lists for Trump's appointments. So the odds are that the last person he'll talk to will be pro-Putin and anti-Ukraine. Another question comes up is, why did Johnson change his mind after voting against all the Ukraine aid bills since the war broke out, except the very first one? And reporters have suggested a number of things. One is that Johnson got scared from the intelligence reports he's now receiving as a speaker, and it convinced him that Russia could break through the Ukrainian front lines, and he didn't want to be blamed for losing Ukraine. And I think neither did Trump, who didn't want that to be a Biden campaign message. And so when Johnson met with Trump at Mar-a-Lago, Trump gave his blessings to Johnson, and Johnson put in the bill a portion of it, the economic aid portion, would be loans is loans to Ukraine rather than grants. But the president can forgive those as soon as 2026. Ukraine is so much in debt that it's very unlikely that'll all be paid. So, of the $95 billion total, 60.8 billion was for Ukraine. Israel got 26.4 billion, which is double what Biden originally proposed. And, Congress was very gung-ho for that, except those 37 Democrats. So they're getting a lot of high-tech weapons. Some of it will go to replenish the U.S. weapons that's already been sent to them. And there's a ban on money to UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, which is providing services to Palestinian refugees, not just in Gaza, but Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon, as well as the West Bank. And it's just cruel not to provide that humanitarian aid. There was another part of the legislation that did provide $9.2 billion in humanitarian aid for Gaza, Ukraine, Sudan, and other crisis areas. But it's a question of how much of that's going to get to Ukraine. And then there was $8.1 billion for Taiwan and other Indo-Pacific allies. And then also in there was a ban on TikTok in 270 days next January if it doesn't divest itself of its Chinese owners. So there's a lot in this. And then just to go a little bit more into the Ukraine portion of it, $9 billion, that's in loans for economic assistance, $23 billion to replenish U.S. weapons that have already been sent to Ukraine or will be, which means that money stays here, $14 billion that Ukraine gets to buy weapons, and $11 billion would fund current U.S. military operations in the region, which means, NATO, Western Europe. So not all of this is going to Ukraine. $48 billion is military aid, and the other $12 billion is for economic assistance and humanitarian aid. And so they're getting a lot of wide-ranging weapons. What's significant is they're getting the long-range ATACMS, and that's the Army Tactical Missile System. It's very advanced. Ukraine has long asked for them and have received a few of the long-range ones, which the U.S. quietly provided last month. There's a question, how are they providing stuff like that when they said there was no more money? And I think I've talked about that. There are ways for the U.S. to declare weapons obsolete and then give them, but Biden wasn't willing to do that without Congress appropriating money to replace them. But apparently they did send a small number, we don't know how many, and Ukraine's already used them to attack air bases in Crimea, which previously had been beyond the reach of Ukrainian missiles, and very effective attacks. The package does not provide for more Patriot air defense systems, only the interceptor missiles and components for the existing systems, of which there are only 3 from the U.S. And Ukraine has asked for 7 immediately and wants 25 total to protect all of Ukraine from missiles and fighter bomber attacks in Ukraine. So, some military analysts are still asking whether the U.S. really wants Ukraine to win and push Russian troops out of Ukraine, or whether the U.S. wants to give enough to Ukraine to fight the Russians to a standstill and then force a settlement that, where Ukraine is forced to give up land for a peace. And I won't do it now, but if people ask me, I will. There was a very important article in Foreign Affairs about 10 days ago by people that had access to all the drafts that went back and forth between the Russians and the Ukrainians in the first months of the conflict. And their basic conclusion was Ukraine, in the end, was not willing to sign that because what they wanted, and they put in their drafts, was that they would have guarantors of their peace, including China, Turkey, Western European countries, the U.S., and Russia. And one of the ways the negotiations broke down is Russia said, okay, people can intervene if we attack, but we have a veto, basically, is what they wanted all the groups, all the guarantors to agree. And the Ukrainians want each guarantor to be obligated on their own. So there's a lot more to say about that. But what the article does blow apart is this thing that's repeated often by people like Jeffrey Sachs and Medea Benjamin that, you know, Boris Johnson, the prime minister of Britain at the time, went to Kyiv and told them, don't sign anything with the Russians. And the real issue was Johnson wouldn't say that, you know, the UK or other Western countries would guarantee they would back Ukraine in a peace deal if it got attacked again by Russia. So that really was the sticking point. In any case, the Pentagon started shipping ammunition the same day that Biden signed it this week. And so they're going to get the artillery shells, which they're very short of. I mean, I've seen the ratio at which Ukraine, because they're rationing their shells, can fire to Russian shells is 17-1. And then these interceptors, these Patriot interceptors, and there's another system called NASAMS. They've been very effective, but they don't have enough interceptor missiles to stop Russia, which has accelerated its offensive because Ukraine has been short of weapons and ammunition. In fact, Putin said a couple of weeks ago to domestic audience, why should I negotiate with Ukraine when they're running out of ammunition? So Ukraine is on the offensive. They've made some progress, not a lot in eastern Ukraine, and they've been bombing the hell out of the energy infrastructure, civilian targets of infrastructure and residents all over Ukraine. Hopefully these missiles will get there. What the reports are is that in about a month, Ukraine will have enough of this artillery shells and interceptor missiles that they'll be able to really firm up their defense, and Russia will have a hard time going any further. And then I'll just tell you a few words. I've been up since 5 this morning because I had to get to the farmer's market real early to try to get a good spot to petition from with the produce. And I got put in the farmer's market again, which is kind of a Trumpier kind of group of people that go through that shed. And so it's harder to get petitions there. I got about 100 both last Saturday and this Saturday in there. I've been in the produce sheds in the past, I've got 150 to 200. So there's just more traffic, and the people coming to get vegetables, more of them know me for some reason than the people going to flea market situation. But anyway, the people I talked to, I think the most common kind of person I talked to was the clueless person. They didn't understand, you know, how you get on a ballot or what the elections were about, even that there were elections coming up. Then there are Trump supporters who, you know, as soon as you ask, can you help me out with a signature to put the Green Party back on the ballot in New York? And the Trump people just say, Trump. One of them had a T-shirt with Trump sticking his middle finger out at you. I don't know how that's supposed to appeal to people, but that's what he had. I think the most common objection to the Green Party was we're for electric vehicles. And there seems to be a lot of people that just like those gas guzzling engines, they want to rev them up. And electric vehicles, one woman told me that the electric field around the electric vehicles will give people strokes and heart attacks. So there's a lot of conspiracism out there. And then the people that do sign, a lot of them, when I say, help us get the Green Party back on the ballot, people will say, the Green Party is on the ballot. A lot of people know me. They say, I've seen you on the ballot. But we haven't been on a ballot for 4 years. And, you know, that's a surprise to people. So, you know, most of those people sign. And, you know, generally, I mean, when people who don't know what the Green Party is, I got a short answer. It's about protecting the environment and the climate, economic justice, and fair elections. And most people say, oh, I'm for those things, and they sign a petition. So if you haven't been out there canvassing for candidates or petitioning to get candidates on the ballot, you know, it gets you out of your normal circles and you get to see what the range of people are thinking. And, you know, I guess I'm an optimist. So a lot of people get discouraged when they hear answers like Trump, or they don't, you know, people just don't know what's going on. But I get encouraged because, you know, every conversation I have, you know, I moved a lot of people when we had conversations, and I kind of enjoy meeting people, even people I don't agree with. Oh, the other thing was the Kennedy campaign had a table also in that shed. Uh, they were kind of at the other end, and they had enormous amount of banners, signage. You couldn't miss them. I just had a table. I had my clipboard, and I would ask people. I didn't want to, sit back and wait for them to come. Apparently, that's what they were doing at the other end. And in terms of people, I only had one person all day from 7 in the morning till 1 in the afternoon say that they had signed the Kennedy petition, and they regretted it because they said, "I would have signed yours if I knew you were here." So I think the Kennedy people are counting on people seeing that signage, and if they're for Kennedy, they'll come sign it. I ran into a few people that were glad Kennedy was running, and given that your goal is to get a lot of signatures, I didn't try to tell people too much about why I don't like Kennedy, from supporting genocide in Gaza to closing the border to the vaccine skepticism, which is really having damages now, like in measles. That's beginning to spread because people now are afraid to get measles vaccinations for their children. And there's more I could talk about Kennedy, but I don't want to. I think by the time the media is done with them, one thing happened this week. His family had a news conference saying none of us support him. So I think he'll be a fading star, a shooting star that'll burn before it hits the earth. Although the polling does show that, I was going to say a few comments about Trump. I skipped over that. Let me do that. Because the polling shows that RFK has taken more votes from Trump than Biden at this point. And Trump had a mixed week. The judge and the New York Attorney General blinked on that bond, which is backed by a shady insurance company. It's not even clear that they really have the cash collateral for it. Certainly not for the full fee, which is $454 million plus interest, and the bond is only for $175 million. Trump dodged the bullet there. And then in the Supreme Court, if you heard the arguments, that was really scary. That's probably the scariest thing this week is, these conservative justices who, the conservative justices say, we just deal with the case before us and the law and the facts, and we don't legislate. But instead of dealing with the Trump case, which is what came up to them from the trial court, they dealt with hypotheticals about, if the president doesn't have immunity, then they'll be afraid to do anything if they're president. And I mean, to me, it was disgusting. They were looking for excuses to let presidents commit crimes and not hold them accountable. I mean, this is basically, they're trying to make the president into the king, which our revolution tried to overthrow, the king who could do no wrong and could not be questioned. And now they want to make the president a king, strong central executive, and Congress is a second, an afterthought. So that was really scary. The liberal justices, raised the right questions, but I'm afraid what's going to come out, they're probably going to send it back to the trial court. And they got the specious argument that, well, if he does something criminal as an official act, he's got immunity. If he does it as a private act, well, that is, he can be held liable for that. But, the Trump people don't care. All they want to do is delay this until after the election. And this remanding to the court, and the Supreme Court doesn't seem to be in any hurry to make their decision, that's going to delay the trial till after the election. And if Trump's elected, he's going to pardon himself. But the good news in all this is the polls are showing Trump is trending down. There was a Marist poll out this week that in the last few weeks, he's lost 8% of independents in a two-way race and 7% of independents in a five-way race. That would include Stein, West, and Kennedy. Most of the polls show Trump and Biden tied, at least within the margin of error, but trending toward Biden in the last month. and that is equally true whether the third-party candidates are in or out. And when the Libertarian candidate gets in those polls, which will probably happen after they nominate one, May 24 to 26 is their convention in Washington, D.C., they'll take more from Trump than from Biden. So, Trump is not looking real strong compared to earlier in the year. And there was another poll out from NBC this week that showed a quarter of voters may change their mind. They say, they may change their mind by November. And it was about the same for Biden, 18%, as Trump, 20%. The people who would change their mind more at a higher rate were the Kennedy voters, 35%. The question wasn't asked of the Stein and West voters. But I think that shows that, this is going to be a Trump-Biden race. And most voters that are thinking now about third party are going to go back, for their lesser evil. The Trump conservatives, the right-wingers are going to vote for Trump, not Kennedy or libertarian, and the more progressive-leaning voters are going to vote for Biden, not Stein or West. I think that's just a larger dynamic that's built into our winner-take-all plurality election for president. So that's why we need to keep pushing as Greens for ranked choice voting and proportional representation in the presidential race, getting rid of the Electoral College and directly electing the president by a ranked choice national popular vote. Those are, I think, really got to be high on our list, because right now we're marginalized by this single member district winner take all system. The spoiler problem, it's very powerful, and we got to get rid of it if we're going to get our fair and proportionate share of representation in the government. So I'll stop there and look for your questions and answers, or questions and comments. In this new format, I can't even see the chat. Where do I need to look? Wait a minute. Oh, I figured out what happened. Okay, Ashley, excuse me. Ashley R. Trump is the most obvious symptom of greater crystal fascist Republican with a Q disease. I think Marjorie Taylor Greene's giving him a little competition on that, and some other crazies in the House. I think Trump doesn't have so much ideology as, he's just a sociopath only interested in what's in it for him. So if the crystal fascists are backing him, he'll go with them. And that's, I think, it doesn't get any more complicated than that. Scout Trooper 164. This is going to be a rough time for third parties, considering there's a lot of fear and people make it hard. I think you mean to get on the ballot. They will be on the list, but hard for now. Not sure what you mean by that last sentence, but yeah, I think, Jill Stein and Cornel West have been very optimistic about how many people are ready to break with the Democrats for a progressive independent candidate. And I think there are a lot of Democrats who would like to, but they're afraid of Trump. And so I think that larger dynamic is going to prevail. I don't want to see that, but that's what I just see, know from experience. It's been the case. That's why we got to get rid of winner take all plurality elections. Otherwise, the spoiler problem, splitting the center left vote, dominates. So, most people that prefer the Greens end up voting for the Democrats to stop the Republicans. That's why we need a system where people can vote for what they want without fearing that they're helping their worst enemy. And that's ranked choice voting. Trey Woodford. What do you see as key differences on critical issues between Dr. Jill Stein and Dr. Cornel West? On the issues, they're very close. Their styles are a little bit different. Cornel's, preaching about values and visions, and Jill's more detailed on the policy. And I think more upbeat, at least she talks about it more, about the potential for a breakthrough by the Green Party. The biggest difference I see between them is that Jill is in the Green Party, working to build the Green Party as an institution that will last beyond her campaign. And we need that to have an organized left in the United States. And Cornell just started with the People's Party, kind of not really knowing what he was doing, and found out it had a bunch of baggage, and was convinced to switch to the Green Party. And then in October, he decided, well, he didn't want to go to the trouble of campaigning among the state parties to get delegates for the National Convention and the nomination. And he was going to go direct to the people. The problem is he didn't understand how difficult ballot access is. And to do it as an independent, to get on states like California, Texas, and Florida, which require, over 100,000 or 200,000 signatures on petitions, he was not going to do it. He's already conceded he won't get on Texas. He was hoping to get peace and freedom in California, but he lost the primary, and that party is controlled by the Party for Liberation, Socialism and Liberation at the Central Committee level, which will make the nomination in August. So he's out of luck in California. I think in Florida, he needs 129,000 signatures. He doesn't have the money to do that. He's only raised, I think he's raised maybe a few 100,000 each quarter. That's nowhere near what you need. If you figure, Ballotpedia had a list of petition management firms that organize petition drives, and they're charging $10 to $20 per signature. Do the math. He needs millions of dollars. He doesn't have it. So he's not going to be on the ballot. And so it becomes, a one-off campaign for Cornel West versus a Jill Stein campaign that's part of its Green Party tradition and organizing vision. So I think, that's the fundamental difference I see between the two. And that's why I'm supporting Jill Stein, despite my policy differences with her, particularly on Ukraine. But, we agree on most issues. And, if somebody says, well, you should vote for Biden to stop Trump, and but Genocide Joe, how can you do that in good conscience? So I'm critically supporting Jill Stein. Drill. Hello, Howie. You are doing a great job. What's your view on the intensive use of nuclear energy for development of countries? I think it's a waste of money, and it creates enormous environmental problems. You can build a lot more electric power capacity with solar and wind than you can with nuclear energy. The costs are just not comparable anymore. The costs of wind and solar have dropped to the floor, and nuclear energy keeps going up. And then if you do build a plant, what are you going to do with that waste that is dangerous for longer than humanity has been around, for at least 500 million years, for the highly radioactive waste? And then you also have the danger of a catastrophic accident like Chernobyl, like Fukushima. And we've come very close in the United States, 3 Mile Island, the Fermi reactor near Detroit, reactor down in Alabama. And so you don't want to risk that. Plus, power plants, if you're a terrorist and you really want to create terror, damage a nuclear power plant and create a big release of radioactivity. And we're seeing that, with the Zaporizhia plants that Russia's occupied in Ukraine, the threat of that happening. So I think, my view is don't touch nuclear power. Most of these countries that are going for nuclear power are also going for nuclear weapons, like Saudi Arabia, Iran now, in response, or they're in response to each other. It's an arms race. Egypt, a lot of these countries are thinking we need nuclear weapons to defend ourselves after seeing what the U.S. did to Iraq, which got rid of its nuclear program, Libya, which got rid of its nuclear program, and now Russia to Ukraine, which got rid of its nukes, its nuclear weapons, gave them back to Russia, because when the Soviet Union broke apart, Ukraine had a lot of those weapons. Belarus had some. Kazakhstan had some. There was a Budapest memorandum in 1994 where those three countries agreed to join the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and give their weapons to Russia in return for Russia respecting their borders and their sovereignty. Of course, Russia's broken that promise, and the U.S. and the U.K. and France and later China signed onto that memorandum, saying, they would. I don't know if the word was guarantee, but essentially guarantee Ukraine's sovereignty. So I guess what I'm saying is nuclear power can lead to nuclear weapons. That's another problem with it. No, we should go solar, wind, smart grid, efficiency in terms of our buildings. We got to transition manufacturing. We need the Global Green Fund, which was set up by the COP conferences, is grossly underfunded. It's supposed to have had $100 billion in its coffers by 2020. Now it's got maybe in the teens. The U.S. has not contributed what it promised. And the U.S. being the richest country should contribute the most. So, but that's the direction we should go. And also, with energy efficiency, you don't need to produce as much energy. But on the other hand, the way to clean up industry and transportation and buildings, in addition to power production, is by electrification. So that increases demand for electricity. So that means, massive solar and wind development. And we're getting a lot of reports recently that as we transition to electric vehicles and digital high-tech manufacturing that isn't so dependent on fossil fuels or replaces fossil fuels with, different forms of electric heating and melting and so forth, the demand for electricity is going to go up after having been in this country flat for a couple of decades. It's going up substantially in the next 4 years, to the point where utilities are planning to take coal plants out of mothball status and build more gas-fired plants, which is not what we need to protect the planet. We need to build wind and energy. That's the cheapest, fastest way to do it. I mean, wind and solar. So, yeah, nuclear. I've been no nukes since the late 60s. I was in the Sierra Club as I was by that time in high school, and the damn Sierra Club got behind the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant. And so David Brower, you may have heard of him. He's a prominent environmentalist in the mid 20th century, right up to the end of the 20th century. He was the director of the Sierra Club. He broke away and formed Friends of the Earth. And I was a high school sophomore and junior. I followed him and joined Friends of the Earth. And and then later in the 70s, I was organizing occupations of nuclear power plant sites like Seabrook in New Hampshire. We formed the Clamshell Alliance. And, those occupations, there were no new nuclear power plants ordered from 1977, when we had our massive occupation of the Seabrook nuclear power plant, 1,414 of us arrested, put in National Guard armories for 10 days, which, again, when they go overboard and trying to repress you, it just builds a movement. And we were in the front pages for 10 days and exploded across the country. So people were protesting nuclear power plant construction and occupying sites all across the country after that. And so the industry didn't order a nuclear power plant until the Obama administration, which provided loan guarantees. But that's been a disaster. They tried to build 2 in South Carolina, cost overruns and construction delays. They scrapped those. It's just wasting money. In Georgia, they're going ahead. It's cost way over time on the building of it, and the costs are more than double what they projected. But they're just bleeding the ratepayers dry to keep trying to build those 2 nukes at Vogtle in Georgia. It's just like I said earlier. The people that run this country, including the corporations, they're not the sharpest knives in the drawer. It's about short-term self-interest and. I imagine the utilities building the Vogtle plants that are such a disaster in Georgia. It's like, well, the top management doesn't want to admit they got a disaster on their hands. So they just keep putting good money after bad and hoping to get out of there and let the next, managers deal with the consequences. Anyway, no nukes. Trey Woodford. I love EVs in theory, but in practice, they become a capitalist extortion racket. And loans, rather than removing capitalist economic terrorism from the equation, would simply increase or at least maintain the bank's nefarious economic stranglehold. I agree. When the EVs are in the hands of people like Elon Musk and Tesla, or even, not so bad or nefarious organizations like, Ford and Toyota and Hyundai and so forth, you got a problem because and I campaigned on this in 2020, the automotive industry ought to be a public utility operated at cost for public benefit rather than cost plus private profits. And when you do that, you can then, you're not incentivized to keep using old technologies until they wear out. You can shut them down and then invest in the new technologies, including clean production. The other thing about EVs is, this is a big part of what Biden's now campaigning on, more money in climate change than anybody else before, which is true, but it's not saying a lot because it's not near enough. And they put most of their emphasis on electric vehicles. And the problem with that is we should be putting a lot more into rail transportation, freight rails instead of over-the-road trucking, high-speed rails between cities instead of short air flights, and then mass transit within cities or metropolitan regions. So the need for individual personally owned vehicles to get from point A to point B becomes obsolete. In addition to that, in an eco-socialist Green New Deal, we would be building out these new mass transit in the cities and then building public housing associated with that to help build walkable communities. So you can go to work, go to school, go shopping, go for entertainment, in most cases within the community, within walking distance. And if you need to go across the metropolitan area, there's mass transit, preferably with free fares, to further incentivize people using mass transit instead of individual, private vehicles. And in terms of the loan situation, we advocate public banks where people can, which operate again for public benefit at cost instead of for cost plus profit for private profit. And so that can get the interest rates reasonable, and reduce the ridiculous fees that these banks charge for all kind of minor transgressions. But another thing we should be doing is, I was talking about this to people when I was petitioning, who, next to me was somebody selling those Anderson, windows, and people were saying, I can't afford that. And I was saying, the government should pay for it up front. They should do the same thing with heat pumps. And then the savings you get between your former power electric utility bill and gas utility bill and what you've saved, you can use that, and it can be taken right out of your bill to pay off those loans over time. And the government could throw in a grant as well as the loan that gets paid off. But the point is, that's the kind of thing that ought to be part of a Green New Deal, so that, what we got now from the Democrats, when they do get anything passed, which has not been a lot, it's consumer incentives in the form of rebates, tax breaks, grants, as well as corporate welfare for producers of these things, tax breaks and grants and loan guarantees and so forth. That's a more expensive way to do it. It's indirect. It relies on the market rather than, basically telling people we're going to get rid of gas and we're going to go to heat pumps for heating and cooling. And we're going to put in, these electric stoves, these efficient electric stoves instead of gas stoves, which creates an indoor air pollution problem. But we're going to pay for it up front, and then we'll cover that cost over time by the difference between what you did pay what you are paying and what you would have paid if you were paying for, gas. Because once you build a heat pump and a, gas cooking utility or appliances, all you're doing is paying for the electricity. You don't have to keep paying for fuel, and that's where you get the savings. So, yeah, the finance sector is predatory on the productive sector, and so I think you're getting at an important point there that finance should facilitate production, not uh, be vampires on it. Patrick Malapoyu or Buyo. I hope I pronounced that close. How do we address climate change in the economic condition of capitalism, which requires constant growth? Short answer is we can't. How do we make a change to societal norms of excessive consumption in America? I think the strategy we need to focus on is, uh, collective public government action to build this clean economy, clean energy economy, with a lot of public ownership and democratic planning, because that's the only way we can get it done. These incentives for market incentives for consumers and corporations are hit or miss and too slow given the emergency we're in. Um, and then I think the societal norms will change. People, they walk the streets as they're laid out, and you can't make them, walk a different way. So, just to take, we have excessive consumption of individual uh, private transportation in cars we own. And you're not going to convince people to drop that until you have an alternative, which would be mass transit, which would be communities designed to be walkable. Um, and then it becomes more convenient to use mass transit or walk than it is to go to the expense of owning a car. Another thing we could do is have kind of a public Uber system where you don't have to own a car, but when you do need one, you call up the public Uber, and it provides it provides it to you at cost. Well, it would be like a public Hertz or Avis. If you're going to drive it, we could do public Uber as well. But so that we have a car fleet in a city that people use without having to own a car individually. Um, I think that would help with pollution because the cars would be maintained better. They could be electric. There's a whole lot of advantages to that. So what I'm saying is, rather than cajoling people to change their consumption habits, we need to change the way we produce uh, what people have to consume, and that's where we'll make faster and bigger progress. That doesn't mean we shouldn't talk about our ecological, our energy footprints, our ecological footprints, and make people aware of how they're impacting the environment. That's just good environmental education. But we can't hope to really make these radical changes, these big changes, by relying on consumers just changing their consumption habits. Because if you got a job and the only way to get there is by a car, you're going to use that car, and you can't guilt people for doing that. So yeah, and then we need a system where the basic industries, the big banks, are publicly owned and are coordinated through a democratic planning system, so that the big decisions on technology investment are made under collective public direction, rather than leaving it to these private tyrannies called big corporations that make their decisions solely or most or primarily, or the lead reason is to make as much money as possible, even if that means charging us more than what they're giving us is worth, like a lot of these pharmaceuticals, for example. um, and we've just had this phenomenon of greedflation where these shared monopolies, uh, the costs, we had supply chain problems coming out of the COVID lockdown, but as those disappeared, companies didn't reduce their prices. to their costs. They kept them high. They called it greedflation. And you can do that if you have an oligopoly or shared monopoly market. So, I mean, antitrust, even if we don't socialize some of these big companies, is important so that, when you have a competitive market, you can't uh, you can't raise your prices because you'll lose customers to the people that have more reasonable prices. But when you have a shared monopoly, uh, they often, raise prices together, kind of wink, wink, and then they compete on, style, the advertising, that kind of thing, uh, which costs consumers too because they build that into their prices. So it's a long answer, but no, we got to go to an eco-socialist system. We need system change, and we need to change the structures of production that affect how people consume more than we need to try to persuade people individually to change their consumption habits because they can only go so far given the way we've produced our, cities and our built environment. Scout Trooper 164, have you heard they got rid of non-compete agreements, restored net neutrality, and handled some other matter? Rare government WS. What's that? Wisdom? I heard about the non-compete agreements. Did the FCC restore net neutrality? I thought that was still under contention. Um, maybe I'm not up to date on that, but yeah, I mean, we do get good things by fighting for them, raising public awareness, pressuring elected officials. Um, it's very difficult. We mostly don't win. The corporate interests do, but on some things we do. And the non-compete agreements, did that come out of the National Labor Relations Board? I believe it did. And the appointments Biden made were much better than those Trump made or even Obama made. So those things they matter on the margins. But going back to the previous question, if we don't get away from capitalism and its drive for endless growth, we're not going to have a planet worth living on. Mike Rice, how do we make ranked choice voting a reality given the current state of our politics? What is the mechanism to achieve that future? Mike, this is one area where we're really making progress. In the year 2000, we had two municipalities that still were using ranked choice voting, in this case, proportional ranked choice voting. So they had proportional representation on city councils like Cambridge, Massachusetts. And that was a legacy of reforms made in the progressive era between the 20s and the 40s. And slowly, the establishment got those removed because they were fair. For example, African Americans were getting elected in Cincinnati, which was using it, so they got rid of it to keep an African American from winning the mayorship with a ranked choice vote. And in New York, they went from two parties, with the Republicans being a tiny minority, given gerrymandering and winner-take-all districts, to a proportional system where each borough, 5 of them, had their own elections, and they had 5 or 6 parties in each city council, and the Republicans got a lot more seats than before. They're maybe 20% of the city, but they were getting 5% of the seats because of winner-take-all districts. And then in the post-Cold War, there was the Red Scare, and people like Robert Moses, the big developer, did a lot of advertising that proportional representation is what they use in East Germany, which was wrong. It was a lie. It was a big lie. East Germany didn't have a multi-party system. West Germany did, and they had proportional representation. But, Moses and these other, Cold Warriors were saying ranked choice voting is what communists do. And that scared people. And even the damn Republicans, they shot themselves in the head because when they got rid of that ranked choice voting, they went back to 5% of the seats, even though they're 20 or 30% of the votes in New York City. It's just amazing. So in any case, we had 2 districts in 2000. By 2020, it was, I think, 24 districts. Now it's over 50 districts, including 2 states, Maine and Alaska. It's on the ballot in at least 4 states and maybe as many as 6 in November, including Oregon. Where else? I believe Arizona, Nevada, Nevada definitely. Montana, maybe they're petitioning there right now. In any case, it's going to be on the ballot in a lot of states. So what I'm saying is, how do we make it happen? We are. We just need to bring it to other jurisdictions. And it's popular with people once they understand what it is. When I was petitioning today, I explained it to a couple different couples that came by when the spoiler problem came up, and they're like, that's a good idea. And they didn't realize, it's spreading across the country. Of course, the Republicans, they're just crazy right wingers. They're now saying, oh, this is a Democratic idea, a Democratic Party idea, and so we should oppose it. And they want to ban ranked choice voting in states. And if they understood it, they'd realize they would get their fair and proportionate share of representation. In some of those states, they're overrepresented because of gerrymandering. That's probably what they're protecting. The other thing about that is the Democrats aren't always the ones pushing this. Washington, D.C., for example, it was pushed. A lot of the Democratic officials opposed it. And there were, I forget the details of how it came to the fore. Some of the counselors supported it, but I think they're all Democrats on the city council there. So the conservative Democrats opposed it, but they got beat. So I think it's on the ballot in Washington, D.C. this fall. So that's what we need to do: educate and then move it to the ballot. In our cities and towns, we can get to the councils and we can write the legislation for them. There are plenty of models out there, and then push them to pass it. And, in a city, most cities, let's say their majority are all Democrats. So you get the Republicans, you get the Libertarians, you get the Greens, you get the Independents. And then you get the progressive Democrats who believe in real democracy. And you can build a coalition to get these things passed. And we're doing it. So I think that's how we make it a reality. And we just, we're winning this one. We need to build on that momentum until it becomes a norm in this country, like it is in, most other countries have some form of proportional representation. And in some of them, ranked choice voting, like Ireland. It's used in Australia a lot. It's used in Scotland for local elections. And that's the ranked choice voting version. There's another version of proportional representation. You vote for your party. And there's a mixed system where you vote for your party and then you vote for your candidate in your district. And the overall thing leads to proportional representation. But in this country, given that our parties are weak, they're not membership based, they're kind of top down, the money's with the campaigns and the candidates, and people are not organized in the local committees like they are in the traditional left party of, you agree to the principles, you pay dues, and you go to a local meeting, and there you decide, what you're going to do about local issues. So I guess what I'm saying is we can move this at the town and city and county level. And the more we do that, then the easier it is to get it at the state level. But in some states, we may find we got sympathetic legislators and we can get it on the legislative agenda, or if it's a referendum initiative state, you can do initiative by petition or have the legislature do a referendum. There are a lot of ways to do it. You got to examine your own locality and state. But the basic point I'm saying is we're making it a reality, and now's the time to push while we have momentum. A. Jones, 35. Can out-of-state Greens help in getting signatures in New York? Yes. Your petition needs to have certain wording. You have to be a voter, registered voter, but you can be registered anywhere in the United States. So yes, out-of-state Greens can help us in New York. Okay, well, I'm a lot more awake than I was before, having got up at 5 and been on my feet for 8 hours, petitioning. So I enjoyed the questions, and At this point, we're just planning to have another question answer comment session next week, same time, same place. Although there are a number of guests that have expressed interest, and I need to get back with them. So, like I surprised you recently with a guest, I forget which one it was. I may have a guest next week, or we'll just be here and we'll talk about what's going on. So, in the meantime, have a good week. Stay out on the streets, whether it's with the Gaza issue, uh, and then ballot access if that's now the time in your state, and the local issues. Stay active because it does make a difference. So have a good week, everybody.